King of Podcasts proudly presents The Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to the Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for being here. Great stuff going on for you on the show tonight. A couple things I want to go and let you know about. We are getting some interviews lined up, and I have a few to go ahead and get everybody out and check out for yourselves. One of the interviews, I finally recorded one, and it's been a while, and I'm actually starting to line some up. I actually finally did a guest search and put the word out, and I have a number of names I have to go and vet through, and then I start scheduling a recording. But for the next 3 weeks, I will have a featured interview with Black media producer, artist, entrepreneur, and owner of APRT Media, or APRTmedia.com, Muyinza Kasirye. And he runs a media production company that does photography and videography, primarily in the entertainment space, working coast to coast between LA, New York, and Boston. Now, I have it in 3 parts because we did about an hour and 25 minutes. But I wanted to separate the interview specifically on a couple things that were going on, because we definitely talked about his work in the entertainment space and his work in, brands, what they needed to go and do. So I didn't even get into the questions right away, but we had a good back and forth conversation on a few other things that were going on. And it's about the first half of the interview, or the first third, is about 16 minutes. So it's just a preview of what's going on that I want to give to you tonight. So I'm going to put that out for you at the end of this interview, or at the end of the program. So if I'm doing about an hour, think about maybe 45 minutes in, you'll find the interview with Muyinza, which was a very interesting interview. Listen, and he'll even say it on the interview, there were certain things that we might not have been on the same page with, and that's okay. But I think talking about the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the issues of denouncing racism, systemic and institutional injustices when it comes to how brands and marketers did, how they handled it when it comes to what was being done because of the Black Lives Matter movement, because of what the escalation of the focus on racism was because of the Black Lives Matter movement, because of the death of George Floyd initially. So that was where we first started our conversation. And then when I go ahead and bring part 2 up next week, we start talking about how businesses embracing diversity and inclusion as part of their corporate culture will often create smart business strategies, boost their financial performance, outperform less diverse peers on profitability, make their employees feel valued and included. So we go through that. We also talk about the marketing campaigns and how diversity, equity, and inclusion has been brought in to the content we watch, that we listen to, that we view on a regular basis. Then I go into a part where we start talking about the content creators and the people behind the scenes, the corporate types, and what they're actually doing in trying to go ahead and incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really creating the stories that should be made like that. And our argument was, how important was it to be the people creating the content versus those that need to be in the room at the table, driving decisions. We talked about that. Allyship we talked about. And we went and talked about underrepresented communities and the whole story about, various things that we took from a Variety article. And also then I went into a great section, which I'll talk about later on in the interview, about where there is an avenue right now for diversity, equity, and inclusion to really get its voice and have a great platform. And it's a platform that's being underused, and it's being poorly served right now. And I bring that argument to Muyinza in the third part of the interview. And I think it was a great way to go in this point. I think we were going in a good direction with it. So I'll have that first part for you a little bit later on in the program. And then I'll bring you part 2, part 3 in consecutive weeks. And you can go and check that out for yourself. But look for that coming up a little bit later on the podcast tonight. Now, moving along. The FCC and Congress, they are now responding to social media. Now, everybody knows the story that's being discussed, whether you believe it or not. The focus of the program will not be on what the story is. Okay, we know it involves the former vice president, now Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. and the allegation between him and his son, Hunter Biden. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Because judging the story itself, I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to worry about what the story is. It's an October surprise. It's politics. It's election season. This is what happens. And when both sides start playing dirty, that's what they are. Politics sucks. I hate it. I don't like Washington, D.C. I'm not happy with government. I don't like how things are. As you know, I'm a very independent voice. I like to keep the show apolitical. So that's my point. So if I want to say anything, D.C. sucks. The government, Washington, D.C. itself, and the capital and our federal government, it sucks. There's so much that needs to be fixed. There is so much that needs to be fixed. Just saying. But what my bigger problem is, that's really what is the crux of what the Broadcasters Podcast is about, is that we do not want censorship of content. We do not want censorship of, people hearing different voices, different opinions, different everything. As long as it's not hate speech, it's not sex trafficking, it's not anything like that. It's not where it's hurting people directly. It's not causing other people harm, right? It's not hate speech. It's not terrorism. It's not things like that. But what is more important is the fact that you have to look at some of the facts that are true. Regardless of what the story was, any comment being done by those that are calling a New York Post story, which has been a publication that's been around for over 130 years. Okay, it's one of the oldest publications in the world. New York Post, run by Rupert Murdoch. We've heard of them. I've used their stories once in a while for this program and other programs because they put out content. Now, are they a little tabloidistic? Absolutely. But that's their version of the news depicted as compared to the New York Times. Basically, the New York Post has kind of taken what National Enquirer has become in a way. Not all the way, because they do offer credible news, but they do talk a lot of entertainment, a lot of other stories. But they kind of took where National Enquirer was. And the New York Post, I think, just done a better job of an online presence. That's why National Enquirer's dropped. And that's why all the grocery store, the checkout counter rags, the Weekly World News or Globe or what have you, they all fell by the wayside. Okay? But where we are now, the New York Post is one of those places where there's a lot of news that gets covered. And it's normally considered a very reputable source. And the writers, the journalists that wrote the story, this investigative story, I talked about before where journalism needs concrete proof evidence. Well, as far as I know, you take the evidence that was reported in this story, you have to weigh the evidence. Listen, they have DNA, they have photos, they have emails, they have evidence. It is evidence that was actually acquired by the FBI. And a copy was made by a computer repairman that happened to go and hold on to it. He held on to a copy because he didn't trust the FBI. So he gave a copy of the hard drive to someone else. And that's how this story got brought out to light. So regardless of if you're looking at, in terms of who possessed what, it was not somebody that hacked into it. It was something that was abandoned. Okay? The other point that has to be made of this story is we're not hearing anyone refuting the evidence that is laid out. We're just hearing blanket accusations of disinformation. But nobody is disputing the facts of the story, which is the whole point. It does include who, what, where, and why. Who, what, when, where, and why. It does have it there. I don't know if there's any bias into it. There probably is. From what I read of it, I don't think there was, but there probably was some. But the thing is that it was no anonymous sources. There was nothing of that nature. It was the story itself and documented proof that they showed in visuals. Now, with Twitter and Facebook, they were concerned about personal information being put out. They called it hack, but it wasn't. And Twitter even had to go and retcon that. But they basically took a link And, I mean, under the authority of the New York Post, listen, it's not for Twitter or Facebook to censor them. The truth is, if the story is getting out there, if there was something wrong with the story, there are libel and slander laws in this country, so they could be sued. Why did that happen? If there was a problem here, why isn't there a lawsuit being laid on the New York Post right now? Nobody can answer that. But really, listen, every time National Enquirer did a story, what happens? It's a lawsuit. New York Times, Washington Post, lawsuit. A lot of newspapers get that. TV stations. CNN, right? Where are the lawsuits? Where's the lawsuits by the Biden campaign or by anybody else that's refuting the story? That is complete hogwash. Take it to court. Why are Twitter and Facebook acting as publishers and arbiters of information? They were just supposed to be a village that allowed information to run across. They were not supposed to be cutting off lines of communication. They're a communication platform. That's what social media is supposed to be, a communication platform. Used for marketing, used for advertising, used for networking. At what point did Twitter and Facebook decide to go and say, you know what, we're not going to do that now? I'm not talking about their biases. I'm talking about the purpose of what they're doing. This is why I've talked about on the show Section 230, the Communications Decency Act. Shielding them because they're platforms instead of publishers. Well, this is the whole point. They did it. They didn't stay behind their reasoning. Facebook is still putting it through a fact check. But either which way, they limited the amount of exposure, both Twitter and Facebook. They did that without a proper fact check. Okay, they didn't do it after the fact check. They did it immediately as the story came out. So they limited and they censored the delivery of news that had come out that was new, it was breaking, it was something fresh. It was something new and important to the American voters that want to make sure we have free and fair elections, right? We want to make sure that, hey, listen, both sides are being, put into it. Listen, we saw New York Times, they released tax returns of Donald Trump. Joe Biden, they're putting out the story of documents showing of alleged corruption. It's going both ways, right? But why is it that Twitter and Facebook decided to go ahead and limit here? They shouldn't be limiting anything. They shouldn't be. Again, but they're doing it also before. So they're trying to be, a continuity department. They're trying to be proofreading. They're doing an editorial of other publications through their lines of communication. And so New York Post or others might be relying on these resources to get the word out of their stories. I'm not sure there's other places they could go. But a lot of people started seeing the stories, and people on Twitter were engaging. It was trending. And on Facebook, it was trending as well. But then for whatever reason, people wanted to share the story. People wanted to go and share the story and let it go out. And then when that happened, that's when Twitter and Facebook decided to limit and censor. And not just censor, they started banning accounts. They started suspending accounts. They penalized users for putting out this content without it being fact-checked yet, without it being disputed through their fact-checkers, without it being put to a lawsuit. Lawsuit, that's where you put a gag order in. Then that's when Twitter and Facebook should go ahead and then take the links down, right? If it's a judge that determines that, it's the judicial system that does that. Local, circuit, federal. They get to do that. They're the ones that decide that. Not Twitter, not Facebook. They are not judges. You want to tag the information? Go right ahead. If that's what you feel like doing. But blocking it from people looking at it is wrong. That's what they did wrong. So it's not so much the story about the fact that he did something wrong. It's the fact that they shut people down, punished them for putting the content out, and they didn't do their proper due diligence of if they want to go ahead and label content being sensitive, sure. If you want to label content being, viewer discretion for adults, sure. Like, I think that's totally within the realm. But what they did here, they just shut it down. That doesn't happen but in communist countries. Now, do we need to say, because it's Twitter and Facebook, they don't really matter? Well, there are a lot of people that are on there and they're engaged. And as far as I know, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act allows them to more or less not be held accountable if they decide to do something like they're doing now. So for whatever reason, they're doing it now. And in essence, they have crossed the line. This is this is the most craven attempt to censor content. It's amazing that we're here at this, but this goes against everything that is media. This goes against everything that is the public sector. The citizen public. The public citizenry should be able to go and know what all's going on out there, okay? If there's stories out there, other stories picked it up, okay? You had federal agencies now investigating the charges. Senate Judiciary Committee, I think, the FBI is on this? Homeland Security is on this? Like, listen, this opened the eyes of the intelligence community. So you had that, plus you had presidential campaigns being shut down. You had the White House press secretary being shut down, among other people, celebrities. When did this all happen? Why did we go to this point? But it's not so much to discuss that part, because that's where I'm going to leave the discussion of why they censored. The real story is that they're not going to be facing the piper. There's already been subpoenas being laid out by Senate Judiciary where a subcommittee in the Senate is going to subpoena Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg of Twitter and Facebook, respectively. They're going to be testifying in front of Congress before Election Day. They're going to have to be held. They're going to be held accountable for what they're doing, because Jack Dorsey did comment. It was not a good stance. Facebook, you never heard from Zuckerberg, but Facebook staff responded. Probably didn't have a good response either. So there's a feeling of nefariousness because of the way it was all handled. It's the timing, and it's what they did and who they penalized. There's a lot of nefarious action here. So it does require things happening where you're going to have now some big stories happening. The FCC is now going to intervene. This, you were allowed for 24 years to do what you've been doing, Twitter and Facebook. The Telecommunications Act in 1996, you had everything set up. And now, because of whatever reason, Section 230 is now compromised. And it's going to probably get repealed, depending on who's going to be in office. And I don't even know if it's going to be even without who's going to be in office after January 2021. We don't know who's going to get inaugurated. But what we do know is Section 230 is going to be put on here. There's going to be some discussion now. It's from New York Post. So FCC Chairman Ajit Pai announced plans to, quote, clarify the meaning of a law that protects tech giants from being held responsible for content posted by their users' post. So it follows explosive backlash to Twitter and Facebook for blocking links to the New York Post Wednesday expose on Hunter Biden's emails. Republican lawyers and President Trump on Wednesday cited the tech giant's censorship of the article and calls for reform of the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, a 1996 landmark federal law that acts as a legal shield for online platforms for material posted by their users, allowing them to be treated more like publishers, which makes them susceptible to lawsuits, much like anybody else. So Pai said that social media companies have a First Amendment right to free speech, but they do not have a First Amendment right to a special immunity denied to other media outlets such as newspapers and broadcasters. Pai wrote this on Twitter. Then he wrote, the Commission's General Counsel has informed me that the FCC has the legal authority to interpret Section 230. Consistent with this advice, I intend to move forward with a rulemaking to clarify its meaning. Now, this was already something we reported a few months ago, where we already knew that President Trump actually signed an executive order to look at Section 230. So that was already made a point. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey on Wednesday night, after this whole story of the expose being censored, he called it, quote, unacceptable that his site blocked users from sharing links to the story without providing a clear message as to why it was taking action. They have variously said the story, which relied on emails obtained from a computer repair person who found them on a laptop, violated his policies on hacking and on displaying private information like email addresses and phone numbers without a person's permission. And as I mentioned before, back in May, President Trump signed an executive order directing federal agencies to look at whether they could place new regulations on tech giants like Twitter, Facebook, and Google, which owns YouTube. So there we go. Let's get more into the story and what's happening here, because there are other places going to it. As we mentioned, there were all of those things going on where the FCC have been looking at it. But this is going to cause them to act because the line has been crossed. Media Post reported 4 weeks ago that they're urged to reject digital authoritarianism, dismissing the petition for social media rules. The Consumer Technology Association told the FCC that putting a crackdown on social media platforms would send the wrong message about the value of free speech. The U.S. should be championing online freedom as the antidote to digital authoritarianism, not succumbing or attempting to emulate that authoritarianism. Now, the organization represents many of the country's largest technology companies. They're asking the FCC to reject the White House's request for rules that can link web companies' legal protections for user speech to the company's content moderation policies. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration brought a petition in July to the FCC, and they're considering it. But again, action's about to be taken. There's no way to look at that any other way. I want to take a story that is from the Harvard Law Review. Take the academic approach here. And I thought what was put together here was very important. In June of 2014. Now, the person that wrote the story, or wrote the response to this article, is Marjorie Hines. Marjorie Hines is a First Amendment lawyer and writer and founder of the Free Expression Policy Project. Former civil rights, civil liberties attorney, past director of the Free Expression Policy Project and the American Civil Liberties Union. The union's Art Censorship Project. Author of Priests of Our Democracy, the Supreme Court, Academic Freedom, and the Anti-Communist Purge. So that's who wrote this. Now, let's get into the story, what she writes in here. This is June 2014. Now, in 2014, she said, Jeffrey Rosen, she quotes, says, Facebook wields more power today in determining who can speak than any Supreme Court justice, any king, or president. Within Facebook's broad ban resides a few categories of speech that the First Amendment does not protect. Threats, incitement, and some subcategory of pornography that might be constitutionally unprotected, obscenity under a local community standard. That is what you don't allow. That is what you censor. What the First Amendment allows and what it doesn't allow. but there's no judicial determination of illegality, just the best guess of Facebook censors. Facebook's internal appeals process is mysterious at best. Now, it's probably true, she says, that Facebook has a First Amendment right to censor whatever it wants in order to maintain the kind of social space it wants. Facebook is not, and arguably should not be considered, a common carrier, and thus it should not be forced into a legal straitjacket that would prohibit content-based terms of service. Google censors general searches as well, as I move down. Its default is the moderate setting of an internet filter called Safe Search, described as designed to screen sites that contain sexually explicit content and remove them from your search results. Google assures that while no filter is 100% accurate, Safe Search helps you avoid content you may prefer not to see or would rather your children not stumble across. She quotes fellow lawyer Marvin Amore to talk about the Communications Decency Act. He explains that Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act immunizes all Internet users who disseminate content not of their own creation from liability from defamation, invasion of privacy, and virtually everything else except violations of intellectual property. Thus, social media sites like Facebook and search engines like Google do not have to censor anything. In fact, one major aim of Section 230 is to discourage private industry censorship, so that free speech can prevail on the internet and those actually responsible for criminal or tortious speech, rather than the pipelines through which they communicate, can be prosecuted or sued. But Section 230 does not prohibit private censorship. Instead, it affirmatively allows it, and therein lies the rub. Vague, broad terms of service applied by powerful companies like Facebook with no transparency and clear avenues for appeal. Now, they talk about New York Times versus Sullivan, which is a story that is something they always kind of go into and they always use as the issue when it comes to Communications Decency Act. So I'm just taking from that just to give some more context. And again, that was to help explain the power and the influence that Facebook or Google, and for Twitter in that matter, have. That is the problem we have here. I mean, it's an overall issue with journalism. Now, I'm not here to go ahead and judge or weigh the value of the story, but the exposés have not been discredited. No one has been able to do that yet. Washington Post put a flat out tagging it disinformation, but there was nothing necessarily said to get to anywhere else. Last week, we had a story about journalism from Neiman Lab that talked about that journalism faces a crisis of trust, and there are two camps on how to fix it. So they write, journalism faces a well-documented crisis of trust. A decline in public confidence in the press is part of a broader skepticism that has developed about the trustworthiness of institutions more generally, corporate. I'm saying it's corporate. Leading to an overall trust recession that worries observers who speculate about the end game of this downward spiral. So they talk about, for example, how journalists for decades have sought to establish trust and confidence by focusing on their democratic responsibility to provide objective information, in which case trust is presumed to be a product of faithfully adhering to standards of neutrality. Reclaiming trust could be a matter of getting back to basics, as it were, and reporting facts in a way that more clearly communicates what people need to know with the independence and distance that people have come to expect from journalists. That is what I want. Exactly that. I've been talking about that for months now. But here's the argument here. But in fact, journalists, if they were to switch their mindset and understand their primary role differently from the facilitation of public deliberation, community connection, and democratic participation of working with civil society as opposed to apart from it, what would that mean for the overall orientation of journalism and how it works? So they talked to some people and looked at some studies. Then they go into using social media. Journalists, how they use Twitter, though quite a bit looking at their use of Instagram. So there are journalists that were looked at for use of both platforms as an illuminating way of looking through the prism of journalists' identities. And there were three journalistic identities that were identified by the people on Twitter and Instagram: the adapted, the skeptical, and the redefiner approaches. Adapted involves fully incorporating the routines and features of social media into journalists' work without adjusting their traditional roles and identity. The skeptical approach goes further in defending traditional journalistic identity, seeing those tools as an encroachment on it and something that shouldn't be validated as journalistically legitimate. The redefiners are willing to allow social media to reshape their professional identities, focusing less on strict professional personal boundaries and more on social media as a self-branding and professional development opportunity. These approaches aren't mutually exclusive, they argue, but are divergent ways for journalists to reconcile their professional, organizational, and personal identities online. We do not want this. Adapted is the approach we should have. Again, back to basics. Just the facts, man. The fact that we're getting journalists that are exploring the idea that we should be redefiners of the news is going way off the map. Should not be happening. I don't agree with it whatsoever. One other story I want to bring up before I get in my interview with Muyinza Kasirye. Not an easiest thing to go and mention, but a great guest nevertheless. Just want to say that. Music business worldwide has something really cool for podcasters. I love this. So here it is. Spotify is testing what is describing as a new listening experience, combining music and spoken word content and a new playlist style podcast format. So shows that will use this format, which the company says is one of its most requested features, will see talk segments and individual music tracks stacked together, allowing Spotify listeners to interact with music within episodes in the same way they normally interact with tracks on the platform. Now, they stated this is a new format marking the revolution from the personalized Your Daily Drive broadcasts that combine podcast and music, which were launched in the U.S. in June. Shows using Spotify's new format rely on the platform's music catalog licenses, which means that music and songwriters are compensated just like any regular stream of a music track on Spotify. Spotify listeners will hear full tracks as part of these shows. Free tiered users will hear 30-second music previews. And shows using this format are exclusive to Spotify. So very interesting. And those that are using the podcast platform Anchor, which is what I use to bring aboard my When I'm Not Podcasting series, it's going to have that. So it'll have that available in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and Ireland with new shows. So shows in a new format with features. This feature being expanded to more countries soon. So it's very interesting how they're going to put this together. I think this is very interesting. That to try to create the music and embed it into podcasts. It's a fascinating concept. I'd like to see how it works out. Keep an eye on that. And let's see if what Spotify is doing will actually create some kind of a rift, will create some kind of a trend that other streaming services might do. As far as I know, I've never been big about Pandora. I did try Apple Music for a while. Never cared for it. I got out of it. Like I tried Apple Music One for a little bit. Wasn't into it really quickly. I just got out. And I got Amazon Music. I never really use it because it doesn't have the feature where you can blend music together. Spotify for me is still the best plan there is, in my opinion. One other thing I want to talk about too, I must say it's a very cool thing to see that Fleetwood Mac and Rumors. Okay. The song is now number 22 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's now, for the week ending October 17th, it's number 21. Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, a 1977 number one hit for Fleetwood Mac. Amazing to see that come together. It's from the album Rumors, by the way, which was, it sold so much. So the song right now, because of a TikTok video we're going to talk about in a second, generated over 36 million global streams in the last 2 weeks alone, up 212% from the previous 2 weeks. Downloads up 1,188%. The track exploded when a TikTok video of Idaho resident Nathan Apodaca, a.k.a. Dogface208, was lip-syncing Stevie Nicks' vocals whilst skateboarding and drinking a bottle of Ocean juice spray went viral. The TikTok star now has 4 million followers and 41,900,000 likes. The video ignited a dreams challenge with people all over the world making their own video of the clip of the song of Stevie Nicks singing in it. And people getting on skateboards or whatever, and they're drinking ocean spray. Or drinking something. Two of the members of Fleetwood Mac, Mick Fleetwood, who did something very similar, who actually also offered to Nathan Apodaca, I think it was a new van and a year's supply of ocean spray, because he was making some money. That's why he did that. So here's what it's done so far in performance. Again, a song that is 1977, a number one song, by the way. The song in 2020 now, it reached number one on iTunes, got as high as number 6 on Spotify's U.S. chart, re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 at number 21, landing on the chart for the first time since its original release. And this is the interesting part, the audience demographic. Spotify has listed that there was a 314% increase in streams from 23 to 27-year-olds, millennials. And then Generation Z, 245% increase, 18 to 22-year-olds. TikTok, the power of TikTok and music, it's very important. We've talked about how other songs have come up out of nowhere. Matthew Waller's, Break My Stride, the 1984 hit. In the UK, the TikTok was being put out, and then all of a sudden, here we go, the song made it on the official charts of the UK in the Hot 100, or in their top 100. The viral phenomenon made people discover Fleetwood Mac's back catalog, The Chain and Landslide, also hitting the Spotify US chart. So people discovering Fleetwood Mac again. It's amazing where this music is timeless. Because I'll tell you, hearing Dreams by Fleetwood Mac again a couple times on my Amazon Tap, I must admit, the song still holds up. It's the song I love. Like Lindsey Buckingham and, John McVie hitting the guitars, the drums of Mick Fleetwood. I think Christine McVie might have been playing an instrument, probably like either just a tambourine or something else she was playing. And Stevie Nicks on the main vocals, but everybody else is playing on the back, singing in the background. Amazing. What a beautiful song. It is a cool song. It's just a cool groove. The track has been heard more than 230 million times in the last 2 weeks, like we said. The iconic album Rumors, which includes Dreams, topped the charts when Warner Records released it in 1977. I believe this was in early 1977 because the song had a lot of songs up there. It hit number one of the Billboard Top 200, the album chart, certified 20 times platinum. And the song itself reached number one on the Hot 100 chart. Rumors was also ranked as one of the top 5 best-selling rock albums in Nielsen's 2020 mid-year report, and the fourth best-selling rock artist this year. They have sold more than 100 million records worldwide. The band was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988, and Stevie Nicks being inducted as a solo artist in 2019. Fleetwood Mac is a supergroup. They're incredible. They got great songs. And by the way, they had songs going from the early 70s when they first came out as a trio all the way to current day, because they got up into the 90s with songs where they were still hitting. They had an amazing career. And you should, if you have not listened to Fleetwood Mac, they are so cool. They were part of that progressive movement, the rock music that was going on. And it was mainstream. It was just so good. Rumors was the album that broke them. And they put out other songs out. They put other albums out there. Like, there are some great songs. The Chain is great. Tusk is great. Lies is great. It's just, you could go back to that catalog. There's a lot of songs to go back. They had a lot of hits on their charts. A lot of songs. So for them to see this come back, it's amazing. And it says a lot about the group and everything that's going on. I'm fascinated by it. The group was launched in 1967. Again, so many songs they had. Go Your Own Way, Landslide, Sarah, That was a good song that hit in the 1980. It was a Tusk album in 1979. Gypsy was a huge song with a video. Rhiannon, which also was the number one song by Fleetwood Mac in 77. Don't Stop, also 77 hit. Say You Love Me. Hold Me was a huge song. They did just so much. Lies was a great song they had late in their run into the late 80s, excuse me. It was just good stuff. All their songs were great. It was such a cool group. And also they went on to some other things. Lindsey Buckingham had a pretty modest solo career. Stevie Nicks had an amazing career for a while, leaving Fleetwood Mac. She had hits for quite a while. Big songs. Edge of 17. You know, I mean, Talk to Me. They were just big pop anthems. Stevie Nicks. And also being noticed and recognized, being part of the Coven episodes of American Horror Story. Like, there's something about her, you know? The whole group just had a vibe. And I remember those people left and they were all fighting with each other, and then they brought them back on VH1. And I'm telling you, people just got back into them again. They went back touring. They got themselves back together. They're just, you know, it's two groups basically brought together. But it's things like this that really, when music brings people together, a lot of new people discovering Fleetwood Mac, pretty cool. I love that. Okay, time for me to go and move into my interview with Muyinza Kasirye, black media producer, artist, entrepreneur, and owner of APRT Media. Again, we get into a great little start. It's a short snippet of the conversation we got, which was about 90 minutes long, but I'm going to give you the first 16 minutes of it tonight. And then I'll give you the next two parts, which are about good 35 minutes or so. A good 70 minutes of the interview I'll play over the next 2 weeks here on the Broadcasters Podcast. But for now, here's part one of my interview with Muyinza Kasirye here on the Broadcasters Podcast. So I've taken some time away from doing interviews here on the Broadcasters Podcast. There's been so much to talk about. And partly what I've been talking about on the program, especially over the summer, is the issues that came across in the light of, you know, systemic and racial injustices we've talked about here on the program. And they're prominent. There's definitive things that can be addressed. We can all agree with that. And we've talked about it in the areas of journalism, music, movies, TV, and radio, all that we talk about here on the program. Well, I got introduced to someone who is here to go and help give a fresh and an expert perspective on everything that comes to diversity, equity, inclusion in the light of the issues that the Black Lives Matter movement have brought in front of us and other issues, because there's always been a social culture that has always been very active and very vocal and things that should be done in order to create those areas of diversity, equity, inclusion to be much more prominent in a limelight. And of course, I've always had the distinguishing factors about if it's, you know, just because a company or a talent or a content creator needs to be allowed access to work somewhere based on checking all the boxes or based on merit and performance. So I want to talk about that with my guest. He's a black media producer, artist, entrepreneur, and owner of APRT Media. I'm here with Muyinza Kasirye. Muyinza, thanks for being on with us.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
So you run a media production company that does photography and videography primarily in the entertainment space, working coast to coast between LA, New York City, and Boston. Now, I want to read from your website real quick. So it reads, quote, "What's become crucial for any artist or brand at any level in 2020 is consistency. Our goal is to be able to not only write a song, do a photo shoot, or produce a video with you, but to create a story and in turn an audience for what you do. With so much noise in the media landscape, which there really is a lot of noise from the signal. In order for an artist or brand to carve out space, it's important that their fans and or prospective fans be hearing and seeing them with some sort of consistency. Nowadays, it's almost a must for an artist or brand to give fans a content-driven narrative to follow. So talk to me about your work with APRT and the accomplishments your team has made. Let people know what you've actually done that we might have actually seen or heard about.
Yes. So we have essentially what we do is we help. I am one of the people that was very early to jump onto social media and the digital media space as a very serious form of being able to advertise and tell story and grow your brand. And so essentially what we do is we find, and how I started was I would find just brands that had a very visually outdated presentation, and we revamp it to the design language and kind of the visual language of today, which is very difficult because of the algorithm to be able to work your way around. So, and then as far as things that you might have known, probably our most recent big project was we got one of my longtime collaborators a record deal with US Republic. And just this past summer, he released his first major single, Mr. Leo the Kind, with the record Ain't Nobody Gonna Touch You, or Judge You, sorry, Ain't Nobody Gonna Judge You. That is the big push that we're making right now, along with a couple of other projects that we're working on.
And just to go and delve into that, when you look at how you have to go and work through social media and just through other routes, obviously streaming is what you're really trying to get the most out of, to try to get that direction. I mean, it's interesting, the dynamic where radio doesn't support anybody unless it's something absolutely bona fide and established. There's no room for local radio to go and even have artists that have that time like they used to do back in the day, where you'd have some local love. None of that's even offered. So there's that point. Nothing is regional. It has to be from a national or global perspective. Get the song put up on Spotify or somewhere else, get the YouTube video out there or put it on Facebook or wherever, and find a way to get people to go ahead and attach to it and then just come into the space. And then TikTok, of course, Instagram Reels. We're seeing that if you can find someone to even choreograph a dance to it in 15 or 60 seconds, same thing.
Yes.
So as you've been working on this, talk to me what you've been doing with Leo the Kind and trying to get that song out there and noticed.
Actually, exactly that. So what we've found is that due to COVID and the way that it has completely changed how we do everything as human beings, and particularly in the business space, what we found is being a smaller company and being able to pivot has been one of our biggest assets, because we had set up, in conjunction with the label, we had tour and all of these things that we were working on that we thought we were going to have to be able to grow and push these records. That evaporated overnight. And so what we've been doing is finding alternative ways to essentially bring that performance and interaction and engagement to fans in a different way than simply going to a show. So finding different ways to reinterpret songs, finding different ways to get content out there that just keeps people looking, and also finding essentially a whole nother, really a new market that we didn't realize could be a thing, which is creating these live shows for artists to put in place of an actual concert. So we've been doing any number of those types of things, as well as ensuring the fact that because everybody's home, that we're also engaging as we're putting out that content.
The other thing too, I also notice is that the song is labeled alternative indie, which there is a lot of I kind of feel a lot of music in terms of rap and all, where if it has a certain sound where it's not so much of a trap beat, if it's something that's much more of a different sound to it being done in the studio, it's a genre that doesn't get enough attention. And I still feel like alternative and indie, just in that respect, it's so much in the underground right now. Like the attention to get. Talk to me about where the artists decide, where Leo the Kind in this respect, about the direction of where you want to go and put records on. And obviously, we from Boston, not necessarily being said where I've seen. I don't know. It's like I'm just looking where when you have an artist like this and you bring him on board, to find his lane, if you will. Like, where's the place where you can go, where you can really market that artist and get them in in front of the right people?
Right. And that's actually the task. So with a lot of, particularly alternative, there are a lot of people there's a way that particularly music has been categorized.
And the problem is, and just to make a point, alternative, my thing is right now is that was what rock was. That's what grunge and all that what happened up until the 2000s. Mid 2000s, the music just went away. Whatever was guitar driven or instrumental driven is gone. Now it's digital. And I feel like there's not a real set identity because some pop stars can actually lend themselves into the same respect, but there's not much of that at all. So it's really it's kind of just a hodgepodge, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the thing. It was categorized, creativity was categorized by the business, but people aren't like that. People just want things that sound good and feel good and put them in the mood that they want to be in when they're engaging with whatever it may be, a movie, a video, a song, a picture, whatever it may be. So it's not so much about, it's really getting to the people and trying to figure out where those people actually are, because it's kind of like people have been put into these pots that they don't necessarily fit in or necessarily want to be in. So you just have to find essentially really open-minded people. That's what we've really generally been trying to find, are just open-minded individuals to a diverse level of creativity, which Leo provides. So that's really been the main issue. It's just trying to find those individuals that don't care, that aren't genre-driven, that just want good music.
Now, the way you mentioned that, the business determines the labels. So earlier this year, because of the real spotlight being given on diversity, equity, inclusion by the Black Lives Matter movement, the record labels started deciding to go and drop the urban name from the artist repertoires, from the departments. The Grammys have also kind of changed things up about using the urban contemporary format. That was a name that was labeled by Frankie Crocker, WBLS fame back in the 1970s. But the thing is, again, it's taking away. What do you think about that kind of labeling when it's trying to just, it's a labeling to try to go ahead and at least create a sense of what the music is? Because I always thought urban contemporary was a pretty well used name. I mean, it might not represent everybody, but I feel like it did serve a purpose.
It did, but the purpose was misused. So the urban is generally, because urban isn't really anything. Like, urban by definition isn't. It's a made up.
What was an idea of the music of the streets? So if a station wanted to play what was called urban contemporary, Frankie Crocker would play disco. He would play some rock songs that just had like a soulful blues type groove to it. Or he would play music that, might have been from black artists or Hispanic artists or even white artists. It didn't really make a difference. It was a diverse format. But the problem is that corporatization has changed all that.
Yeah. So what does urban mean to you?
Urban always meant because, if I listen to rap music, there are artists that I know of that are black, Hispanic, white, or Asian or what have you. It doesn't make a difference what it is. But urban's always been, I mean, when I was growing up, all those stations were black. And then the Hispanics, any Hispanic type formatted stations that would also encompass altogether. We used to have a format was called rhythm crossover, and that's a format that I miss, because this is where it comes down to diversity. Rhythm crossover was what brought certain songs and certain artists to the limelight. I mean, that's how you got the mainstream. Rhythm crossover created Dr. Dre. It created, say like House of Pain or Heavy D and the Boys or whatever. I mean, or just a freestyle artist like, Cover Girls or Stevie B. Like, that's the kind of thing we had. And Two Live Crew would be brought into the mainstream because of that too. It was those kind of things where music was just more allowed, and I thought it was just more raw. I just think that because there's so many, and this is where deregulation comes into play. When companies get swallowed up by other companies, and you only have 4 major record publishers that own almost all the record labels, who's going to get in the door? So indie only has so much room to get in.
Yeah. So the problem, the actual issue with urban is actually part of what you said. So urban is essentially Black music. That is essentially what it became defined as.
Yeah,
is urban music. But but Black music is not just Black music isn't a thing. Like,
no,
Black
because
music,
Black artists can also be in a
thing.
number of different genres. Absolutely.
Yes, and so that therein lies the issue, is that what started to happen almost immediately was any type of music that we created, regardless of what it was just relegated to urban. So someone can make a pop record like a Tyler the Creator, but it's put into urban because he's a Black artist. That's where it became and has become an issue, is that music that we make, even outside of the genre, or not even a genre, just any music we make is just relegated to urban when we make a diversified collection of music that exists in all genres.
And this is my fight.
That's the issue with it.
And this is my fight with corporate. Muyinza, this is my fight with corporate because of the fact that I have hampered this. Oh my God, I have thumped on this for years. Did you know the American Top 40, that countdown that Casey Kasem used to host back in the 70s and 80s? I don't know if you grew up ever hearing about that. The Billboard charts, the Hot 100, that is still listed today. When you heard mainstream radio, top 40 radio, the top 40 songs were what's on the Hot 100. And you see what's in the Hot 100. I think it's a very good makeup and representation of all artists across the board. I mean, I can look across the board, and I think it works, but that was what they used to play. And then somewhere in 1991, because there were a lot of issues, some of the music was getting a lot more raunchier, a lot more edgier, right? It wasn't so much soul music. You were not hearing soul music from the Dramatics or James Brown or things like that, or Aretha Franklin, because the music was changing. New wave, just 80s, so much change in music. And then the 90s was just getting so diverse. We had so many different feels to it, from dance to, just to whatever. And then we get to the point of where, American Top 40 was the standard. They would play what the Billboard chart was. Whatever happened, because of the music that was being changed, there was an offense to it. There was a hesitation. And so we're going to make mainstream music pop. And that's it. Pop used to be a genre within mainstream music. Now it's just a watered down, homogenized thing. So anybody to be able to make themselves get up there, it's harder for somebody to cross over into that part. Yes, but it is quantifiably more difficult for a Black artist. Like that's really what it comes down to. Again, Tyler the Creator said it best at the last Grammys. His album he won an album for Urban Album of the Year. His album was not an urban. It was not categorized correctly at all. He really wasn't a genre. It was something completely different than what it was categorized as. And that's really what we're saying, is just that we just want the same level of diversity in how our music is looked at as everyone else. That's really just why the urban title it became antiquated, because we outgrew it, essentially. We outgrew that title. From almost the moment that it happened, because the music that we make is way more diverse than just one, block of thing. And that's really the issue. All right, it's time for me to go and get out of here. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, checking out the show like you always do. We'll do more. My interview with Muyinza Kasirye coming up on the next show. Again, his website is aprtmedia.com. Check it out for yourselves and follow him. And until next week, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, The Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at KingofPodcasts.com.